The plan to accelerate repairs on the MBTA follows a new report by the state on traffic congestion. The report confirms problems that are well known, but also that travel problems have reached a tipping point. To tell us what that means, especially for people in Boston, is our guest from the advocacy group Transportation for Massachusetts. We'd like to welcome the transportation justice organizer, Angela Johnson. Thank you very much for being with us, Angela.
Thank you for having me.
Angela, when I heard about this report, at first I didn't pay a whole lot of attention because I'm thinking that's the North Shore and the South Shore, but why is this such a scary thing for people here in Boston?
Because Boston is just so small. Really, although we have 92 square miles of space here in Boston, we only have about 45 square miles. And then everyone from North Shore to the South Shore, even from those coming in from Western Massachusetts, are all converging onto the employment centers that mostly exist within the Boston region. This is not even to include the people who live within Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, Brookline, Quincy, that are also trying to come into Boston every single day in order to go to work, go to school, or just to visit their friends. So this report is timely and yes, can be a little anxiety-inducing, but it's something that we absolutely need to be talking about.
Reading a little more closely between the lines, I see a story here about jobs in Boston, people wanting to work in those jobs, but it's so uncertain whether they'll get there and when. What does that mean in the future?
In the future, it really means that in order for us to continue to get around, we have to really rely on the T. I know that right now, relying on the T sounds like a really daunting task considering the derailments that we've unfortunately had, and as well as some of our friends in the southern neighborhoods, such as Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, who have much greater transit times than some of our neighbors in JP. It can seem like a lot to ask that people rely on the T, but Boston gets around on the T, and drivers need to also understand that if people aren't on the T, then they're also on the roads, and the roads are already congested as it is. So we need to work together in order to make sure that people understanding that the T is what really makes us work. And not only that, but it'd be great if we start talking more about alternative options of getting around too. Because like I said earlier, Boston's really small, which means that people can get around using biking, using walking. So why are we not also putting those options at the forefront?
Looking at the congestion that this report focused on, I know it's outside the city, but we're familiar with the T having problems because the trains are old or the infrastructure needs to be fixed. But what's the problem with these main roads?
The main roads here, what we're really seeing is that it's just a surge of people that are coming in. First, there are people who are having to move outside of Boston because it's just gotten too expensive for them to live in the city proper. And then the surrounding cities that I pointed out early, Cambridge, Somerville, are also becoming a bit too expensive as well. So people are having to move outside of the MBTA transit shed. They're not even close to using a bus line anymore. So now they're having to drive into the city. That is what we're really seeing now, just people being forced to return to cars where they would probably prefer to continue using even the commuter rail in order to get into the city.
And if I'm not mistaken, one of the places where that congestion comes to roost is in East Boston.
Yes, East Boston is really getting hit hard with congestion, not just from people who are driving in from the North Shore, but also due to the proliferation of Uber and Lyft rides that are converging on Logan Airport. Many of those Uber and Lyft rides are deadheaded, so they're just circling around trying to find people who are going to be using them for pickups, drop-offs, etc. But having Uber and Lyft additionally on our roads does add to the congestion that we're seeing today.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with Angela Johnson from Transportation for Massachusetts. Angela, I want to ask you about the ride-sharing factor here and the empty trips coming back from the airport. How do you shrink that?
How do we shrink that? I will say that I personally have been using the Logan Express. So the Logan Express picks you up at Back Bay.
And it's cheaper now, right?
It is cheaper, yeah. You could, I think the way it goes, if I'm not mistaken, is if you pay $350 to get onto the Logan Express and then get into Logan Airport, but then it's free for the return. And it's like, either I pay $350 or I pay upwards of $20 to get back from Logan Airport to JP where I live. I'm gonna take $350 any single day. So I think that Mass DOT has been really great about offering that option. I just wish that it was more known. I wish it was more widely known. I just don't really see as many people using the Logan Express, for example, as I think that it could be. That bus should be full every single time.
Of course, the other problem with congestion is that it's not uniform. You know, if you look at the average travel time increase in recent years, it's not that scary. But if you get away from the day-long averages and you look at the peak hours, then it becomes really horrible. What do you do about those peak hours?
Yes, we have seen the peak hours have stretched from our traditional, 5 to 7 or 7 to 9 a.m. in the mornings, and they're stretching from 3 to 7 now p.m. and from 6 to even 10 a.m. now. And it is quite tough. I would say that one way we can think about getting away from congestion is by asking people to shift their trips from using their cars if they are able to, and shifting them onto commuter rail and or buses. What I did really like seeing from the congestion report was that Governor Baker was really for the further addition of dedicated bus lanes. We're seeing them do really well in Roslindale, and there's now a pilot happening in Alston. I have the chance to get out there, but I feel that it's going to have very positive effects for the 57 bus. It'd be great to see more dedicated bus lanes throughout the city, because we know that people are not using our buses because they're being stuck in mixed traffic. And how can we expect people to get on a bus that only moves 2 to 3 miles per hour when they can just sit in their car and do the same thing?
The report mentions exploring the possibility of peak hour pricing. I can see how the governor doesn't want to go there all that quickly, but on the other hand, is this really worth a try, maybe?
I think so. And that goes back to the whole tipping point. It's not just the governor saying that, it's also the advocates. We are understanding that, we may have to start asking our drivers or riders to start making some rather hard decisions, and peak hour pricing could be one of them. I know that the governor is not as keen on smarter tolling as we are here in Massachusetts. At the same time, the idea of a managed lane, which is what he is touting, does give me pause. Given that I am from Houston, Texas, I am very much aware, right? I am very much aware of what managed lanes mean. And the way that I grew up was that there's a feedback loop of, we have a lot of congestion, let's add a lane. That congestion is gone in the short term. Less than a year later, that congestion not only reaches back at equilibrium, it actually gets worse, because we have both current users and we have new users that are now saying, hey, why not I take that new lane, because I should have a much shorter commute than I used to. And then we go back over the tipping point.
I grew up in Boston, and I used to think all the people who moved to suburbs were a lot richer than we were. But today things have changed. A lot of people who can't afford to live in Boston have to live out there in some of those far out communities. If you have peak hour pricing, it would affect them, I suppose. Is that fair?
I understand what you mean. And this is something that we grapple with. But at the same time, people that are being forced to move out to these far-flung suburbs are already sitting in traffic, and are sitting alongside people that may not have to be at work at 8 or 9 a.m., who may have more flexible schedules, who may be taking a drive into the city or taking a drive to a neighboring city because that's what they can do. I think that we should start thinking about ways that we can help our friends and our neighbors that are working these service jobs, that do have lower incomes, that don't have as much flexible time as we do. And I think this is a way that we can help with peak hour pricing. An interesting way to also think about peak hour pricing is that, well, for those of us who may have to be at work for 8 or 9 a.m. and maybe their own SNAP benefits, why don't we see if we can start rolling in some benefits so that they aren't going to be as hurt by the additional cost. It can be mitigated in some way versus someone who is able to pay that price, whatever it could be. That of course has not been set.
Finally, I know, like a lot of other cities, Boston is expanding infrastructure for bikes and other incentives for people to use their bikes.
Yeah.
What would it take to get more people to make the shift, let's say, from ride sharing to bikes?
First of all, we need a connected bike network, a connected and protected bike network. And by connected and protected, I mean that right now our bike network goes from, and I'll give my commute as an example, from JP to Downtown Crossing. I go from the beautiful Southwest Corridor to for the parking protected bike lanes that are behind Northeastern, to unprotected, pothole-ridden bike lanes on Columbus Ave, to nothing. And that is an issue. People will only bike up to a certain point until they're thrown into regular vehicular traffic. And it can be really scary. We do our best as advocates, as a bike advocate, I do my best to try to educate and try to assuage those fears. But until people feel like they can trust that drivers will see them and that drivers can trust that the cyclists can also see them, it'll be a bit of an uphill task. But a protected and connected bike network is the best way to actually get people on their bikes. Because we do see that people are interested. And we do have people asking us questions about how do I get on there. And Lord knows that I wasn't biking before I came to Boston, but I learned how to. I think it could be done.
Just finally mention, I know you've got some more information on the website about upcoming events and campaigns, so if people want to find that, what's the best way to seek it out?
Yes, you can look us up on T4MA.org, and you'll see many of our policy proposals, and you'll also see a collection of our 58 members and partners that we have statewide.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Angela Johnson from Transportation for Massachusetts.
Thank you.
We'll have more news in just a moment.